All right, today we have to talk about shame. Shame is a really important thing to understand on a deep level, and I see a lot of misunderstanding around shame and also a lack of understanding of the differences and the nuances involved in shame. And so the main thing that I want to share with you today is that there's a big, big difference between what we call toxic shame and healthy shame. So when I feel into the collective conversations around shame, I see a major, major blind spot that is, I believe, really, number one, holding humanity back right now from reaching the next stage of evolution. And number two, it's actually responsible for creating the rise of narcissism. And so I want to explain today that, first of all, lumping shame into one thing or one category is really missing the understanding that shame actually has a healthy side of it. And I'm going to break these two things down for you today. So, just to get started, there's so much that I want to share with you. And I'm not going to make a super long video on this because I'm going to point you to a resource, actually a few different resources where you can go deeper. This is meant to just give you a little bit of a taste to the main things that I want to convey to you today. And so right now I'm looking at an article I wrote on Substack. It's called A Shameless Society is a Narcissistic Society. And right off the bat, I know that this video might trigger people until I really clearly explain to you the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame, and that's okay. I just want to ask right off the bat for people to see if you can just stay with this video and just and have an open heart and an open mind because I'm really coming from the best of intentions here. So I guess even before I get into healthy shame, I just want to say that there is an absolute truth and necessity for us to be able to understand that toxic shame is very, very damaging to us. And I have a whole teaching around this in a private container that I call Alchemy of the Heart, where we actually work with how do we actually deal with tougher emotions like shame, sadness, fear, anger. And so I actually was revisiting that because we'll be launching that and doing it live again as a group in June of 2026. So I was revisiting some of the content which inspired this video. And, toxic shame is something where there's a really beautiful aspect to the collective conversation that is trying to, that has an intention to actually wipe shame out across the board, because this is the first thing I want to share with you. What I see on the collective is that we are attempting to remove all shame from the equation. And so that's the title of this Substack article, A Shameless Society is a Narcissistic Society. I'm going to tell you about how removing all shame actually causes this today, and how the most important thing is that there's a massive difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. And in a way, there's a polarity here where doses of healthy shame, which actually are meant to help us to grow and evolve, actually can take us to our most evolved selves. And on a level of soul development and evolution, healthy shame is absolutely required. In fact, it's a deeply spiritual path, which I'll attempt to at least give you a taste of today. Toxic shame actually is very much the opposite. It can bring us really down into the lower realms, very traumatizing. And so, although I'm not going to spend as much time today talking about toxic shame, because when we use shame in general and we don't have an understanding that there's two different types of shame, the way that most people are talking about shame when they don't make that differentiation, they're talking about toxic shame. Toxic shame is one of the number one ways that our self-esteem, self-love, self-compassion get eroded. And toxic shame is basically, it comes from relationships, usually starting from childhood. It doesn't always come from mother and father and parents' influence, although for many of us it does. But basically any other relationship, in your life, starting from early on, where you got messages that this part of you is unlovable. That part is not okay, right? This, and that are not up to the mark, right? This is where toxic shame comes in and it starts to erode our ability to love ourselves. And in fact, this teaching that I have around shame is one of the most important ways that we can heal our self-love and our self-worth. So shame is a really, really big deal in terms of how I work with people to help heal and to help. Um, it just fits in very well as a foundational piece of work in one-on-one and group work with clients to help to heal our hearts so that we can actually show up in relationships in a new way, right? Because the core of so much of our relationship difficulties and why we settle for less and why we make ourselves small leads is because of the low levels of self-love and self-worth that we have, right? And we get small, we get dim, and there's that strong inner critic. So all of this is tied to the impact that toxic shame has on us. And so I absolutely work with people very deeply to heal and also to clear energetically from the influence of toxic shame, right? And so I also work energetically with people to clear that because it actually has a darker imprint that has to do with the energy of kind of yeah, it's damaging, it's harmful, it erodes self-love, and so it's that pulling down. At worst, it can get into kind of the darker energies, and also you can pair it with things like abuse, of course. And so I think I'll just kind of leave it there, but I am definitely not saying in this video that toxic shame is something that we need to change our relationship with. We absolutely need to heal from it. I often say that it's a poison, that actually gets into our heart, our psyche, and our even our energetic body, and we need to clear it. Healthy shame, on the other hand, I believe that all emotions actually have a form of intelligence. There's a higher healthy expression to anger, for example, and there's also a very lower violent, damaging side to anger, as an example. Just as with anger and with many of the emotions, there's actually two sides to it that we need to see. And so healthy shame is something that I want to really see if we can open our minds and our hearts to. And as I give you an example, it might become more clear. So the example that I often use is, so if you are a child, like, and you're learning, right? Maybe you're very small. As a child, if you feel a feeling of anger, maybe there's two little children playing with each other, and there's something, maybe someone takes a toy that you like or something, and the child gets angry and then maybe they will punch or they'll hurt or they'll bite the other child. That is something where healthy shame is in response to, let's just say the child is reprimanded, and ideal parenting, that the parent will be able to stop the behavior, right? And not in a way that's overly shaming, right? But in a way such that it protects the other child from getting harmed. And then ideally can maybe take the child and help them understand and work with how to appropriately channel anger if it comes up. But the tinge of maybe shame or guilt that a child feels in response to um, being reprimanded for punching or biting or kicking or physically hurting another child is an example of healthy shame that actually is needed and necessary for us to be able to learn how to um, more lovingly show up for other people. So this is where I'll actually just start to share a couple of quotes from this article I wrote on Substack. It's called "A Shameless Society is a Narcissistic Society." The quote from George Simon that I start out saying that kind of is, these are some truth bombs here. He says in his book, Character Disturbance, one of the hallmarks of disturbed characters, narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths, is a pathological lack of shame. I had George Simon on the podcast and we talked about the rise of narcissism, and this topic came up around the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. And that's a really good episode. I might link it in the show notes here. George Simon's work around all of this and how he found what really helps and really assists people on the more narcissistic end is was a huge breakthrough for me. As well as John Bradshaw's work around this too, which I'll quote here for you. John Bradshaw says, without healthy shame, moral behavior and ethical responsibility are impossible. And so I just want to share a little bit because I'm not interested in reinventing the wheel here. I go pretty deep in the resources I'm going to point you to. But I start out with the article saying that we have become a shameless society, wanting to completely remove shame from the human experience. But this represents a dangerous ignorance of the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. I really do believe this is one of the big, 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 big lessons that we need to learn right now. Healthy shame is when we do something harmful to someone else, feel the internal discomfort of having done something wrong, and yet it's actually for our benefit and for other people's benefit because it's a very powerful internal shaper of pro-social behavior for the highest good of all. So again, if I go up and I punch someone in the face, that tinge of healthy shame is actually a really good thing. It's okay. It's okay. It's actually a really, really good thing. Right. And so in my relationships, when it comes to communication and being able to share in the relationship with another person, that it's okay for us to actually have open, loving communication around what feels good and what doesn't feel good. It took me a while to get here in my relationships, but I often just say and create the culture in my relationships that I want to know if I do something to hurt you or that doesn't feel good, I want to know, right? And maybe if I hear that from somebody, maybe I'll have a tinge of healthy shame. And that's okay because why? Because I actually want to know how I'm showing up with other people. And it gives me an opportunity to make adjustments to how I show up, to be a better person, to be a better friend, to be a better partner, right? To be a better mother. Like, I want to know, I want to hear, and it's okay, right? I can handle it. If I do something wrong and I hurt somebody, it is so beautiful to be able to take responsibility for that, to be able to have that tinge of healthy shame that actually can help me grow and evolve and become a better person, as well as to improve my relationships. And so this is really beautiful, right? And for us to create a culture in our relationships where that kind of dialogue is really welcomed, of like, and I can also do the same in my relationships to be like, hey, that didn't feel good. And for all of us to be open to be shaped and molded in a positive way by that tinge of healthy shame, right? This is where shame can actually get pretty deep because for those of us that do have a history of the more toxic shame, where it has really eroded our self-love. As adults, we don't even know how to differentiate between healthy shame and toxic shame, and sometimes even situations where maybe healthy shame is there for us to work with. It can send us in a spiral where it can start to really impact, our self-love and our self-worth. So shame is a really deep one that oftentimes it's very helpful to work with a professional to unpack this. But I just wanted to say to first, for everybody to really differentiate between these two things. We do not have to wipe shame out across the board. In fact, it's very, very dangerous. So when we try to wipe shame out, this is where it gets into how it can actually breed a more narcissistic society. I'll give you another example of like in childhood, something that I heard about is that a mother or a caretaker, when there was two children playing, was of the mindset that we can never, ever, ever, use shame. Shame is never good. So there was these two children playing, and one of the children did actually bite the other child and start to like physically harm the other child. And this mother was so frozen and did not want to bring shame into the equation that she didn't actually even intervene because she was so afraid that if she intervened and maybe pulled the child back, that that child would then have a sense of shame. And so this is an example where we can't let this happen. We have to be able to have this much more nuanced perspective that not all shame is bad, right? The child who is getting hurt and harmed does need protection, right? And this is also where boundaries come into play, right? Oftentimes when people have a misunderstanding of shame, they also have a real misunderstanding of boundaries and they have difficulty with boundaries. And so boundaries and limits for all of us need to be set. Like for all of us, we need to be able to have boundaries set with us. Sometimes it doesn't always feel good. And of course, this gets into much deeper work. But what I see across the board is that, this desire for a shameless society really kind of goes hand in hand with a society where boundaries across the board are being very eroded. And so when there's sort of this there's this thing happening where I get into way more detail in the article, so I find myself I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole with this. When we try to remove shame from the equation, it leads to a society that really does not have very strong morals or character or just the bare bones ability to treat each other well. It gets to be all about me and what feels most comfortable. And I never want to be able to feel shame. And I never actually want to receive feedback of maybe where I can improve. It's a very self-centered model. And so that child who maybe the mother didn't intervene because she didn't want to shame the child, that child is now not learning about healthy boundaries, is not learning about pro-social behavior, and that child is of high risk for actually growing up and developing these narcissistic characteristics. And so these loving, healthy boundaries, notice how I actually say, boundaries with love, the combination of both. This is not discipline that is, this is not the type of discipline that is authoritarian. Because authoritarian parenting, when it's very strict and very rigid, without that love and care, often does use toxic shame as a weapon. Whereas, like the healthy middle of parenting, which is authoritative parenting, I've covered this before, where there's these these three different forms of parenting. You have authoritarian, which is very, very strict and often punishing, sometimes abusive. And then you have the permissive on the other end of the spectrum that doesn't have any boundaries. It's kind of like anything goes. The parent, honestly, is kind of absent, right? And the child grows up without a lot of limits, a lot and without boundaries. The permissive parenting is also tied to the rise of narcissism, by the way. The healthy middle of parenting is the authoritative approach. It's boundaries with love. It's being able to really see the child and celebrate their strengths and help them on a level of heart and care for them to be able to grow into, the path that their soul desires, but also those healthy boundaries to be able to teach the child right from wrong and how we actually treat each other. So such a deep topic that, again, I don't have time to get into here, but we need a little bit of the healthy shame, all of us, all of us. So this even relates to the inner work that we do with ourselves and how I've seen this permissive style come in and distort how popular shadow work is being taught too. When we do shadow work and we shine a light on our unconscious, it's not just about loving all of our parts, right? Like that's part of it. But sometimes we have parts of us that are very distorted, very maybe harmful, abusive, dysfunctional. And, with great humility, we're all on a path of growth and learning. And so there's parts of us, especially if we really have stuffed them into the unconscious, there are parts of us that actually do need help to become more mature. And so the deep part of shadow work that is often missed when it's taught on social media or pop, whatever it is, psychology teachings, is that there is a transmutation process that's needed oftentimes with shadow parts of us There's some parts of us that we have stuffed into the subconscious that, yeah, all that we actually need to do is just bring them back home and love them. But there's other more complicated parts that need some love, care, and attention in a bit of a different way. It's not about like shaming those parts or being really mean to ourselves, but just with clear eyes, seeing where we need to actually grow and evolve within ourselves, right? Like I often tell people when we do this deep work, we love our inner children, we love our inner child, but we don't actually want them in the driver's seat of our life, right? That's where we get to really step into being our own best parent and the deep, deep work of reparenting ourselves to make sure that we love these parts of us, but we actually don't let them run the show. This is getting into like kind of a deeper discussion on shadow work, although I did make a video on YouTube talking about some of the distortions right now when it comes to shadow work, so you can refer back to that. So I'm going to start to wrap up here, but healthy shame in its highest expression of like actually being like, oh my God, yeah, I hurt you. Like I made a mistake, right? Like that's okay for us to feel. Depending on where we're at, if we're highly traumatized or dysregulated, some people are not able to withstand even the healthy shame, right? But when you can start to really heal and actually develop that healthy level of humility of like, I'm totally imperfect. I'm human. I'm messy. I'm going to stumble and fall in my relationships. I'm not always going to be awesome. Sometimes I'm going to be, bitchy or whatever. And I can actually accept responsibility for if I hurt someone's feelings, if I do something that isn't great. I do want to know about it so that I can use that to become better, right? And so this is the path of life. And so I wanted to really just say that it is really, this is not a video where it's just like this kind of cool thing to understand the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. If you read the Substack article that I'll link in the show notes, you can understand like the zoomed out perspective of why I actually believe that there's a little bit of a darker agenda behind why we're being programmed to think that all shame needs to be wiped out across the board. So I think I'm going to end there, and I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, how this is landing. Does it make sense, the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame? And I'm going to, as always, include a few links in the description here if you want to go deeper, if you're interested in this. And right now it's May 2026, but in June, we're going to be doing the live group program version of Alchemy of the Heart. And so one of the modules is going to be a deep dive into the alchemy of shame. We also cover anger, sadness, and fear, which these are the darker, kind of denser emotions that people struggle to work with and actually see that there's an aspect of beauty and alchemy there that we need to learn how to work with. So this is what this program is all about. It's actually available right now. The course is available as a self-study program if you go to my website, but we're going to be also doing it live in a group together starting in June. You're welcome to purchase it now as a self-study if you want to actually get exposed to the material and start to go through it yourself. And then you can also join us for the live as well. And I'm happy to give you a little bit of a discount so we can work that out. But regardless, this is very foundational material for us to learn how to work with our emotions and how to become alchemists and how that directly relates to how we show up in our relationships. And so, yeah, this was a fun one to record. I've been wanting to record it for a while, so hope everyone is well. Talk to you soon.